Welcome to today's edition of Daytime Dialogues. I have the great privilege and pleasure to welcome a friend to the program today, Rabbi Binyamin Blau. Rabbi Blau is currently based in Cleveland, where he's been the Rav of the Green Road Synagogue for 10 years. Before that, he served in a community that his grandfather founded in Elizabeth, New Jersey for 11 years. He's the Rosh Hashiva of the Fuchs Mizrahi School in Cleveland. And if that doesn't sound like he's busy enough, he is the newly elected president of the Rabbinical Council of America. And all of those things he does with great skill, talent, and a love for Klal Yisrael. So Rabbi Blau, thank you so much for joining me today.
Rabbi, thank you for your kind words. A little humbling. I hope I do them. I hope I live up to everything you've just said. But I'll say the one part that was undoubtedly true, you are a good friend. And as a previous president of the RCA, I will turn to you for guidance and wisdom as I navigate my term.
You will do it beautifully and wonderfully. So Rabbi Blau, just to start out with an obvious and easy question. As a new president of the RCA, what's on your agenda? What do you think we need to be accomplishing as a Rabbinical Council of America?
So it's an excellent question. I really think that there are two really directions that we have to be focused on. I think there's an internal and an external. I think in an internal note, as an organization, we really have to make sure we're doing all that we can to support Rabbanim in every possible way. I think that's the job of every president. And I am trying to identify those areas that are uniquely required to make sure that the Rabbanim get the resources they need. And that could go from anything from the practical and pragmatic in terms of healthcare, in terms of more professional development, which is really critical, Rabbanim working together. That was one area. The area that, of course, that's so critical is I think we have a very important voice. And in an ever-changing and complex and very complex world, to be that voice of a Torah true voice, but with also a voice that really has that degree of moderation and nuance that is often absent in the discourse is critical. So that's our role. And I'm trying to find ways to amplify that voice in a positive, proactive manner.
So those are generalities, but is there something, like what's on the table right now that you're looking to address specifically? Is there some crisis within Klal Yisrael, something that needs to be spoken of?
So I'm hesitating only because I'm trying to work very, very closely with our team as a whole. So if I look at the various things in terms of issues that I think are critical on the table, there are a range of issues. I think there are a range of issues in terms of, I'll give one that's less obvious. For example, making sure that the Geiris process is one that's done with proper dignity. Look, we're constantly fighting the value, and this again seems a little bit generic, of fighting for Torah values and finding ways to really come up with careful articulations and nuanced articulations to really promote those values in a way that is merutza lakol, is what I'm striving to do. So I don't want to get ahead of myself, Rav Lenny. I know you'd like me to reveal the whole platform, but I'd like to really, in deference, and I'm really trying very hard. We had our initial officers meeting last week, and I really solicited from the officers, the list of things. We took 15 different ideas. I'm going to try to winnow down and get to 3 or 5 that are really going to hopefully make a big difference in Klal Yisrael.
Well, and in terms of the Cleveland community, when I was growing up, Cleveland and Chicago were like sister cities. Bnei Akiva was in both. They were both served by one Mosheva in those days. And there was a lot that seemed to be in common. What do you find so attractive and what's so exciting about Cleveland?
So one of the beauties, and there are a lot of similarities, and as you may refer to later in the interview, I did grow up in Chicago as a really little boy, many years ago. There are a lot of similarities. I think there's the beauty of being a Midwest city with the ethos and the pace of life that really is attractive to Cleveland, but we're not a town that does not have a lot of options, a lot of shuls, a lot of all the vibrant aspects of Jewish life and just communal life are part of Cleveland. So that duality, where you're in a city that's, I would use an interesting analogy, and in Chicago is a little bigger than we are, but we're sort of like a mid-major in the sports world and universities, where we have a lot of, but there's a beauty to that. There's really a beauty to that. There's a beauty to the sense of the pace of life that comes with being in Cleveland. It's really part of the nature of the Midwest, that sense of appreciation and understanding and not being quite as driven in a way that can be challenging. So I think that's been very appealing. I've loved raising my children here in the Midwest.
It's, you, as you mentioned, you were born in Chicago. You went to Erie Crown. And
Yes, I did go to Eureka, and I have to be candid. I was really young when we left Chicago, so I have this vivid image of playing in the gym, but I'm not sure if that's a superimposed image upon me that really did happen. There are beautiful pictures of Ivan Soloveitchik giving me my sitter. That is true. So, and that I will never forget. And there are other images as well, but I do wonder how much is that coming from the stories and how that is my real memories. When I visited Chicago at different times, it's always been a pleasure. I can't say it flooded back that way. That would be dishonest.
no, but your father was, at the time, he was the principal of what's now known as Fassman Yeshiva High School. And then he and your mother and he moved back to New York area, where he's was mashgiach in Yeshiva University at Reitz for so many years. What I know you came back to Cleveland originally was to work with the Torah Mitzion Kola, wasn't it?
Right. So I initially came as part of, I joke that in my tenure, my time in Cleveland, I've done everything but have been a traveling mohel. I came to be the Rosh Kollel. I then morphed into the principal of the Fuchs Mizrahi High School. And now I have my current dual positions as the Rabbi of Green Road Synagogue and the Rosh Yeshiva. So I've covered a lot of ground in Cleveland in my 20 plus years here.
And in terms of the Cleveland community and your role in the RCA, I'm certain, are you the very first Cleveland rabbi to be a president of the RCA?
Wow. So I actually have to go to the historical records. I don't know if that's the case. Our good chaver, Rav Elazar Muskin's father was involved, but I don't recall him being the president. I think Elazar was the first of the Muskins. So, wow, that would be a very notable distinction, and really, not that I don't have enough pressure on my shoulders already. You would add a little more pressure. That may be the case.
I do think you were. I'm not 100% sure. When I became president from Chicago, I was the first president from Chicago with an asterisk, because before, when the RCA was first getting started and merged with the Alumni Association of Hebrew Theological College, Rabbi Fassman had been the president of that Alumni Association. So he has an asterisk at times in some of the history books. And I would be very happy to be included on a list which has Rabbi Fassman and me together. So my guess is you're the very first. It's fascinating, we're doing this over Zoom, but up until conference calling really became an easy possibility. It was unheard of to imagine that a president of a national organization was coming from out of New York. It was really.
And I think you speak to something that's very important, and speak to the strength of the organization and the nature of our Jewish community. In fact, of the last 5 presidents who've been in the RCA, yourself, Rabbi Muskin, Rabbi Karapkin, and Rabbi Baum, only one of the 5, including myself, are actually based in the New York, New Jersey area, which actually speaks to our strength, that we really are a national organization, and that we really to see that there's leadership beyond. I know, having grown up for many years in the East Coast, we know the famous map where there's only Chicago and LA and nothing else. But I think that speaks to us, it speaks to our strength, and it speaks to Baruch Hashem, the fact that there are so many Talmud Rabbanim across the country and in North America, with Daniel, my predecessor, being, of course, in Toronto.
Yes. And obviously your shul, my shul, we're all coming out of Corona. Hopefully we won't have a reemergence as they're finding a little bit in Israel today. But what are the lessons you've learned from the era of COVID-19 in your shul that you're going to continue, that you're taking forward?
It's an excellent question, and I'll be very specific, not to give it the generic lessons that we've all tried to learn. I think really being incredibly 2 points that have been very crucial to me, of very different natures, but both incredibly valuable, that we've maintained. One is appreciation for what our mispalim need in terms of their davening, what in tefillah. Our davening has been tighter. I have no other way to put it. Obviously, there were times when we had to omit parts of davening, and now we don't have that challenge. But the sense of looking at the davening and where the intensity of the kavanah really was magnified when the davening was not quite as elongated. And we've gone to a point where even my main minyan, Shabbos morning, Shabbat morning, is a half an hour shorter. And that means being judicious about what we've cut out, not davening. I'll give you a very interesting, pragmatic example. We used to take out the Sefer Torah, go around the entire perimeter of the shul. It was a lovely 10 to 15 minute progression. I got to say hello to everyone in the shul, at least all the men in the shul. And of course, decorum totally broke down. And we stopped that and we go straight to the Bima, and it's amazing. It's helped the davening. Yes. Do I now have to work harder to meet everyone in the shul? But it's worth it. So that's been critical. It's actually been fascinating that we've actually increased the number of minyanim that we started during COVID. And we have more minyanim than we had before. Because now partially that was due to recognition of different needs, but that's been a fascinating phenomenon. I'm very, very blessed. I have more people coming to shul now than I did prior to the pandemic. Definitely for Mincha Marav during the week. Definitely for Mincha Marav during the week, which is amazing.
Well, I find Shachris and Mincha Marav are large, but part of it is because people are still working from home and they're available.
It's true. It's true. Well, also part of the beauty is, as both of us are in the Midwest, it's so late, Mincha and Marav, they're way home either way. We joke that Shabbos ends on Sunday in Cleveland. But the other thing that I've actually noticed is the need to reach out to the older members of the shul. I think I will always try to be careful about that. During COVID, it became acute. And I have a list of people that I call every Thursday or Friday. And even though we're back in shul, but not all these people are back. And that need has not vanished. And I do that now. They know. And what's sometimes fascinating, some of them are a bit older and may not recognize, like they don't have their answering machines. And so one woman called me, Rabbi, you haven't called me in 2 weeks. And I didn't want to gently say, I have called you, you just didn't pick up your machine. But I like it. I like the fact that they expect the call. They feel that sense of connection. And those are two very different aspects that are going to continue.
And with all of these with the extra minyanim and things like that, how about shiurim? We were all doing these things on Zoom.
It's a fascinating point. I much prefer the nature and the intimacy of a live shiur, the vitality of a live shiur. Certain aspects that work well in Zoom, I actually have continued. I have a nightly halacha class that meets just for 20 minutes. And it was really in the place of my Between Mincha and Marav shiur when we weren't meeting regularly. And that group, we remain. So yes, and now I'm doing double duty. I still give my Mincha and Marav shiur and this is earlier. So we've retained it. And the recognition, like you were mentioning earlier, Lenny, the fact that we recognize that you can do even our session together in this format, not neglecting that. I really do prefer, for a while I was giving my Shabbos afternoon Gemara shiur on Motzei Shabbos, which was a weird dynamic. So that has come back to its normal slot. But the recognition that this is an option that's valuable with wisdom has been maintained and will be maintained.
So we're having some challenges because some of the shiurim are hybrid. And we always prefer being in person. But the reason we kept some of them hybrid is we have some members who made Aliyah during COVID, who former members who started attending shiurim again. And to go just live presents a problem. You're knocking them out of the picture. But then the people who live in Chicago, well, if they're running a little late, they'll go on Zoom. And I'm sure you know, as do I, it's a little complicated to do hybrid.
Yeah, so Rabbi Tanki, you're a wiser Rav than I, but and I don't know how many pieces you can split yourself into, because if you describe how busy I am, anyone watching this video knows I don't know a busier Rav in the world than Rabbi Matanki, but I would bifurcate them, because I do find the hybrid, they don't work well. Someone loses out inevitably, and the dynamic of a Zoom shiur, an online shiur, and the dynamic of a live shiur are so different. I did it. Many of us did it. I also teach in the high school. And yes, there were inevitably a student or two who is not in class for a variety of reasons. And there was one young man who spent the whole year at home, and he really lost out, because as much as we tried to include him, it was Eino Doma, and he was the Yotzi Min HaKlal. So again, Rav Matanki, I don't want to tell you how to run your shiurim, but I would maybe make the Israel people get their special hybrid version, get their own version. Again, I don't want to even do double duty. So that would be hard, but
yeah, that'll be the challenge. In school next year, are they going to have an option of Zooming in?
So I'm only the Rosh Yeshiva, not the head of school. I think Rabbi Joe would like to not have that option if he can avoid it. The truth is, we were very fortunate. We really were open the entire year. Very little disruption in terms of the Fiuk Mizrach, the school. It was really a Kadosh Baruch who watched out for us. And as I mentioned to you a moment ago, I think when students were forced due to various, obviously, concerns, that was different. But the students who opted for the online all year, they suffered. They really suffered, and I think their growth suffered.
No, we actually at Ida Crown, we already announced that Zoom is not happening next year, that the only cases will allow someone to remote in is if, God forbid, there's a long-term illness. But
Right.
no more, I'm going on vacation a few days early, I'm planning on Zooming in, or those kinds of comments as well. Are you doing, did you find in shul when you're doing a quicker or better paced davening that you were cutting out some of the singing? Well, we
So
cut
that's
out.
excellent. So that's a good point, Rabbi. Thank you. I think in the early stages that was cut out of necessity, because then we really had this desire the davening should be much, much quicker. And that's really the sweet spot. The sweet spot is being able to include the singing again, which is the heart of davening. You know, the davening has to have a tom. It loses that taste. It loses that feel. Ironically, a Ruchani Minyan started, which was during our time, because their concern was there wasn't enough singing even before COVID, let alone during COVID. So it's been very important that the for lack of a better word, my regular minyanim have adequate singing, and therefore I'm trying to find the other places. I don't know if you're doing the same with Matanki, the lengthy mishaberachs, where I give mishaberach to every member of my family, and the guy in the back row, and Yankel, and this one and that one, we've cut out. Now, I don't know if my executive director is as happy with that, because I'm not sure that the donations have come in the same way. But those are spots where it's not the quality of davening. Quality of davening is the same. It's just the length of the davening, and in my shul, particularly the decorum. Those are really where that's where it breaks down. So the elimination of those aspects has helped.
We've knocked out all mishaberachs except when there's a bar mitzvah. They'll make one for the family.
Right.
The president no longer makes announcements on Shabbos, which was one of the duties of every president in every shul, and some did them brilliantly and some did them less brilliantly. But we saved there. We also cut out in essence, almost about a half an hour of davening, sometimes even a little bit more. And it's interesting. There's a tension between people saying, a 2-hour Shabbos morning davening works, and maybe we don't sing Aleinu ever again. Or
right.
Ein Elokeinu. Just last week was the first time we sang Vayhi B'Tzoaron again. Trying to bring things a little bit back more to normal.
We've had the same tension. It's funny you mentioned that, because Anam Zmiros has not come back yet, and I have a number of people pining for it.
So we have Anam Zmiros. We didn't want it on the cheshbon of the kids.
So here's something interesting. That you raise a very fascinating point. The larger idea of COVID, I think, has been allowed for a reset. It's a reset of the shul to take a look at all the things that we've done in the past and have we done them wisely. And because we took a break and we had to come back, it allowed us to really say, well, how we changed our whole youth group model, which is wonderful, except I now no longer have kids in shul. Most of the kids are in youth groups from 9 to 11, which is fantastic from an educational standpoint, but it's ironic. We've lost the Anam Zmiros, which was in the middle of davening. I have no one to sing it because they're all at groups.
Are you doing Anam Zmiros in the middle?
So that was a pre-COVID tikkun. Again, the uniqueness of our shul. I inherited a shul that was very robust and dynamic in all aspects of davening and talking. They were quick to welcome people to come in. So any place that I found there was a breakdown, I tried to shift. So the end of davening, the Ein Elokeinu Anam Zmiros Adon Olam, was one of those quicksand moments for us. So by moving Anam Zmiros earlier, years ago, that was a very important tikkun.
Now, you mentioned the youth groups being a very important educational piece. I actually remember in Chicago, at least, the youth groups on Shabbat morning really came after the Eruv was built, and parents started bringing kids to shul. And until then, kids sat with their parents, and at a certain point in the middle of Lena, you let them run around wild. Is it more educational or more efficient to have the youth groups?
Rabbi Tanki, you ask an excellent question. Rabbi Ilan Feldman and I had a discussion about this recently, because he was very much lamenting that his groups are the longest and most extensive, and he was bemoaning the exact point you're making. But it's a challenge. It's a challenge if parents are equipped to do it and if kids are equipped to do it. In a much more perfect world, you are correct. The beauty of having your children daven with you and next to you is wonderful. I'm not sure all our parents feel they have the wherewithal or the mental ability to do it. So in my less perfect world, having teachers run groups as opposed to lovely teenagers has been a tremendous, tremendous upgrade. But there is something lost. There is something lost in the larger scheme.
So we actually got teachers, I mean, not just the teenagers we normally have.
Right. So of course, again, our executive director and I are trying to figure out how we're actually going to pay for that, which is, and we don't have, in that sense, part of the beauty is, I mean, there are a lot of kids coming. We have like 80 to 100 kids in the groups, but it's essentially 3 teachers. We do have teenagers assisting them so that they can, divide things accordingly. But having 3 professionals really run the groups has been tremendous, tremendous. It cannot compare. I have one of the Rabbeim in the Fuchs Mizrahi school who runs a davening area for 5th and 6th graders, and it's beautiful. It's beautiful. It's transformative. Again, speaking to your point, could they graduate and go to their parents? Perhaps, but he's doing a wonderful job.
Now, you grew up in a rabbinic family. The Teitz family built one of the most important Jewish communities of the previous generation. Elizabeth is not the same today as when you were there even. But how have things changed from when you were a child watching, I assume, your grandfather running the operation of shuls, and your mother wrote this wonderful biography of your grandfather. And how do you think it's going to change in the course of your rabbinate? How is shuls really different?
Wow. So it's a difficult question to answer because I want to figure there's a distinction between my grandfather himself as a personality and the rabbinate as a whole, which is also 2 different issues. Look, I think that the areas of involvement, my grandfather happened to be an extremely involved Rav who really, there's a great line about my grandfather that I have to share with you, Matenki. I don't want to run out of time, but the joke was when someone wanted to approach my uncle, who was my grandfather's successor, but at that point was his assistant, about a policy issue in the shul. So my uncle said, Elizabeth, is a democracy. It's 1 man, 1 vote, but I'm not that man. You have to ask him. He's down in the hall. So that was a certain concept of the Rav as the ultimate authority. I don't think our Balabatim view it this way. I don't think the shuls are done that way. And it's far more collaborative and it's far more reaching the people in a different way. And it's not a question of which model is better. It's just a reality. So I think that's a very, very different dynamic. The idea of really engaging and involving more people in a decision-making process while still maintaining our authority as poskim. And this is our call. This is our decision. It's not a vote of the membership how we deal with certain halakhic matters. That's really not up for debate. So there's a real shift there. There's a real shift in the need and the real appreciation. I think all Rabbanim will pastoral, but I think that role has greatly increased over the recent years.
And do you see, you just added on and redid your shul. I haven't seen it yet, but someone—
You're welcome, Rabbi Matanki. I'm happy to bring you not just a Zoom meeting.
Thank you. But someone was just there and was telling me how beautiful it was. But your shul, the Green Road Synagogue, is a big box shul. In Chicago, we have some big box shuls, and we have a lot of the smaller shul storefronts, all different kinds of configurations of shuls. And it seems like in America, we're moving away from the big box, except when you need something.
So, Rav Lenny, excellent. So I wanted to give a talk called The Stabilization of America. I think it's very true. And that actually you hit actually the key point. I think the huge distinction in my grandfather's time, there was 1 million, there was one everything. And what we have had to do, and I think it's healthy, but it's a change. I go to 3 minyanim every Shabbos morning and speak at all 3. I daven at all 3 minyanim. I'm getting portions, obviously, because they run into one another. And that sense exactly what you described, where there's this phenomenon of there are multiple shuls and the shtibluch starting every moment and little but shuls. So in essence, how do I create those type of units within the shul, but they're still feeling part of Green Road Synagogue, and yet they're feeling their own identity. And that's a challenge that our predecessors didn't have. And that's a unique challenge, and it's a unique opportunity. I think when done well, then every member of the shul, not every member, but members of the shul feel their spiritual needs, really their spiritual needs are being taken care of under our banner, and yet it's still feeling connected. And even though it's long, I get up every morning and go to the Ashkama, and I stay till the end of the Ruchani. And each minyan has me speak at a different point in the davening. And the Ruchani minyan wants to talk at the end of davening because they're davening straight. So that means I'm there from before 7:30 till off until 12. But each shul, each minyan feels they're part of our shul. I don't want each minyan to feel like they're a unique enclave on their own. That's a definite challenge that our predecessors did not face. It's the reality, and either we find a way to adapt or we're going to be in trouble.
In other words, it's not something necessarily by design, but it's just dealing with the reality we can't ignore.
I think the Barovam Hadaras Melech, which is a beautiful concept. I like the shul being together. The idea that you can have, you asked me at the outset about goals for the RCA. Let's say I have a goal for the shul. I want to get that message to the shul. So you'd give a drasha, you give a talk to the shul. Well, you have to give that 3 different times, 3 different ways. I know Rabbi Luckstein once, and a number of years ago, I wrote an article bemoaning the fact that he used to bring in a guest speaker because he had something, the guest speaker, he wanted to impart to his kahila. He said, but half the shul didn't hear him or her because they went to one of the other 6 options and the person can't speak at them all. So you lose a sense of unity. I used to do a large Megillah reading. We used to have 600, 700 people. So it was a balagan. It just was a balagan and it just didn't work. So we had to split it up. Is it better and healthier split up? Of course. But something was lost. There was a power. We felt like one kahila, one community, and that gets lost in these distinctions.
So do you ever bring everyone together, call nidre or something?
So again, that's an interesting reset. For years, people have asked that we bring everyone together for Ne'ilah, and our old setup didn't allow for it. I don't know how many Clevelanders or Green Road people are watching our video today or watching our interview, but there's a good chance that this year we'll do it. It's a chance to reset and have everyone together for Ne'ilah. I think it would be very, very powerful. I'm waiting for the pushback, and I'm waiting to see if we could really make it work on a technical level. I'd love to do it. There are moments, but it's so hard. Just the needs are so diverse. And by accommodating those needs all year round, people get conditioned and then they don't want that. They push back. Like Simchas Torah used to be the time I never used to let there be an early minyan because I wanted everyone to be together. And I relented recently in the recent few years because it just, the needs of the tzibur outweighed my personal desire, as meaningful as it was, to have a whole community together.
I do want to point out for the KINS people who are watching, that while Rabbi Blau hits all 3 minyanim every Shabbos, I will be hitting 2 generally, especially with the new branch opening up soon.
Right, Mataki, I don't at all. You are a Rav par excellence. Your community is very, very fortunate to have you. I think you also have an assistant and associate rabbi, do you not?
Assistant rabbi, and hopefully even another one soon. But Rabbi Bresson does a magnificent job, and it's good to have.
Your balabatim are not losing out, and I know that you are accessible to all of them all the time. So I think they are fine. So chas v'shalom, I should not get you in any trouble.
Oh, no trouble at all. I'll say in Cleveland they can do it, but unfortunately Chicago, we just aren't as fortunate as the people in the Green Road Synagogue are with Rabbi Blau. And I have to mention, by the way, I don't know if you were looking in the chat, and I don't know who this is, but Moshe Tzvi D. wrote that Rabbi Blau's father, Rav Yosef, and his grandfather, Zal Rabbi Teitz, taught me, Moshe Tzvi Dauber, taught me to learn Torah, love Torah, and Baruch Hashem, live Torah.
Live Torah, which is the name of the book, my mother's book, and right. That is really wonderful, Moshe Tzvi Dauber, yes, indeed. And look, I'm very blessed. I am blessed to have the parents that I have and the grandparents that I have. I have many big shoes to fill, and I'm trying to do my best in my own way to fill them.
And you had also you were very fortunate to have learned with many great personalities, from Rav Svei, Rav Kamenetsky, over to the Rav, your father, your grandfather, and also your time in Har Etzion with Rav Lichtenstein and Rav Amital. So you have all of those wonderful things you're able to bring to the shul. And now, Baruch Hashem, also able to bring to the RCA. And Rabbi Blau, believe it or not, our time is up. I thank you so very much for giving me 30 minutes when, thank God, I don't think there are any other minyanim running, so it's able to be done.
Rabbi Tanki, it is an honor and a privilege, and I thank you so much for the time. It flew by. We could have done another hour with pleasure. Thank you, Rabbi Tanki.
And the other audience is looking. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you as well.